Thank you for staying behind today. My name's Liam. I'm Community Director here at the Orange Tree. We run community events for parents of babies up to over 60. So if there's any way you'd like to get involved, please just have a look at our website and see the ways that you can, or a school or a children's school can get involved with our work. I'd like to congratulate these guys who are the creative team of tonight's show. This is Rajiv, who's the lighting designer. Diane, who's the director, this is Niall, who's the designer, and Esther, who's the sound designer. And these guys were all part of the show, which was the James Menzies Kitchen Award winner of 2021. 2021. Yes, so let's give them a round of applause for that. So just to go sort of back to that, could you talk us through the process of that, Diane, and how that sort of came about and how you came to take part in it?
JMK, I just applied it as a directing award for early career directors, and it's really great. So you go through a process to get a list of plays, and then you pitch one, but it's quite a long process of being long-listed and shortlisted, then doing a final pitch. But along that journey, I teamed up with Noel, our brilliant designer, and we worked together on the design, obviously not designed it. But yes, we worked together and then do one final pitch, and I do a workshop with actors, and then you find out who's won. That's it. And then you get a show, which is amazing. And here, yeah, that's it.
And how did you choose? You chose this play specifically, did you?
Yeah, no, I don't know. It felt like. That it was just sort of in conversation now, and I think like particularly thinking of apartheid, which wasn't that long ago. It just felt like, I don't want to say relevant, because some plays are always relevant, but it did feel that. And even just some of the lines, I think we're having similar conversations, which I think makes it an amazing play, but also makes it really sad and tragic that this is a play written 50 years ago, and some of that stuff I can say now.
Yeah, absolutely. So sort of, what is the play? What is the play about for you?
For me, the play always felt about what it means to be human, and how we're all able to stand in the light without fear and judgment. That's what the play felt like for me. Obviously, all the the other themes, and and I think set during apartheid obviously gives that different shift, but that's what the play seemed to be saying to me.
And what's sort of interesting, as you mentioned about the lights, loving the light they like, is that throughout the play, the love happens in the dark and the fear happens in the stark light. So for you, that's kind of a bit of a gift as a lighting designer. There you go. But also that's quite complex when you're playing in the round as well. So how was that process for you?
Oh God. Super challenging. One, you're looking at it from every single perspective, from an audience member's view, where you'll see something completely different in every single scene, but in the same way, it's the same show. And so you take it from the emotions of what the actors are doing, from the emotions of what the piece says, and you play with it. And also the other challenge is, in fact, we have a hole in the middle, which for me is a challenge, but also an exciting challenge, because I get to play on multiple different levels. I get to play with height, I get to play with how texture from lighting affects how you see it and how the actors interact with it in the space, and just in general of how like the scenic art of the image of the whole, which in my first instances, my first conversations with Diane and with Niall was about this set, where it's a black hole, it's a creation disk, it's where light gets trapped in the outermost edges, and it's how you see it from that point onwards. It's always the shiniest around the edges, and it's so dark in the center. And so it feels like when they do step in, finally, we lose everything around them, and it's just them in the center. It's just their most personal, intimate space. But then when they're out of it, it's how can we try and avoid as much of that light spill. So I had to have a big think, and thankfully we are in the round, because then that means I get to play with angles I never actually, you wouldn't conventionally use on an end on stage.
That's great. And also, the other interesting thing about this play is that it's originally set in a library. This wasn't actually a natural occurrence at the Orange Tree. It didn't just have a sinkhole. You guys actually made that happen. Could you talk us? No, would you be able to talk to us about that? So starting with the library and then going, actually, no, this is going to be. There's hardly any books here. So, like, how would you?
Well, when I first spoke to Diane, I think I first said to her, like, if you're looking for a library, you're not going to get anything. Because after I read that play, I just thought the amount of themes that were shouting at us early on were just like, the library for us was so irrelevant. And look at the Orange Tree itself, you can see it sort of has the architecture of a library, and it has that sort of sense to it, which, so for me that was the reference to the library. But, and then it was all about, particularly those like monologues towards the end, and even in the middle of the piece, there's a lot of this sort of reference to them talking to something or someone, and for me that was always sort of drawn upwards into the centre and up. And you know, Errol at the end is talking to this omnipresent like being at the end, and that was always it. It was always drawn into the centre for me, and then out of the centre became this, you know, this pit where they could embrace and love freely and unapologetically, and then becomes this space that completely divides them at the same time. And that was the hardest thing. That was the challenge we gave ourselves, was to how to create that intimacy, but also the complete divide towards the end. And sorry, Chief, it's my fault. That's my little hole.
The beautiful combination of that, and that moment where the water dries up in the well towards the end, but also it's just like they're destined to go down there, aren't they? It's like a constant swirl. But what really contributed to that, I think, Esther, is your sound, and that drone that just comes in is just terrifying, deep.
Yeah.
But you've also balanced that with the joy of the music at the beginning, which is just so beautiful.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about your process?
Very early on, Diane and I established like cosmic themes, and that was really helpful to like understand like we're going up with the sound. Being in the room as well, and hearing Diane work with the actors and hearing the conversations. It was really, I had a lot of resistance actually, just being in the room, just hearing the conversations, and I guess it was helped to like support the fact that it's very intimate. Like the choice to have it all stripped back, it's very intimate. So how to support that all sonically, is like a boundary and it keeps them in there. Yeah. So yeah, and it's amazing to work with a director who's so in touch with their senses. The set, again, just reflecting that, and of course the lighting is fabulous. So you know, it all comes together really well.
Really did, really did. Can I ask if anyone has any questions in the audience at all? Could you put your hand up for me?
I have 3 questions.
Sorry?
3 questions.
Could you limit it to one at the moment, and then maybe we'll come back to you?
This is my first time coming to this theatre, so I was just trying to understand. You said, I would assume that this is how it is all the time. But you're shaking your head and saying no. So how did you just cut a hole and shut it down, or how did that happen?
Yeah, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, quite literally, yeah. So the theatre itself actually has a pit, which is more like a rectangular square. And then basically we infilled the outside to create the depression in the centre. So there's a pit, it goes a wee bit deeper. So it goes like you know, 85 centimetres deep. And yeah, so everything you sort of see around here is infilled with polystyrene, and then we cover it with I forget what it was sort of like this Jasmonite stuff. and then we paint it with paint. That's basically it. Yeah. The idea. I'm really glad you said that though, because the idea was that it's supposed to feel like the theatre is.
Actually, it looks like
So you've just validated the whole thing.
It means you're going to have to come see every show now.
Yeah.
Well, I will come back to you, but are there any other questions at all from anyone? This gentleman?
Yeah, sorry, I missed maybe just the beginning of the Q&A, but I want to know that why, what was the inspiration for them being in this darkness? Like you said, it was meant to be a library. There weren't really many references to like the books of the library. It just seemed very much like a, yeah, it just felt. Yeah, I'm just wondering like what was the inspiration? What was the thought behind choosing to stage it in this particular way?
So yeah, the thought behind the circle and the darkness. What was the thought behind the darkness?
It always felt to me that the themes of the play were bigger than the library. It felt to me that setting it in a library would not add anything to the story. And basically it's not, well, the play's written as just one long scene. It's not broken up into scenes or acts. Although it feels like they're in 2 acts, so it feels like the first scene is when we're with them and then the police officer comes in and everything changes. But it always felt to me that that the library wasn't going to add anything to the story. And actually the themes of the play, in terms of, I think, the history that we bury, the distances between us, this sort of place, and I think you said it now, where it's their place of love and comfort, but also once they're out of it, becomes this kind of, you always said, this wound in a space that we then can't ignore. So for me, it felt like the themes of the play, metaphorically, was going to give more to this story than setting it in a library, and that was my sort of thinking, and that was your thinking as well, thank God. So that was, yeah, the reason why.
I just think that's a really bold choice.
Yeah.
To like set something. So like, yeah, that's. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Plays like this have to have bold choices, or
Yeah.
else they're just going to fit into the background. And a play like this, when Fugard first done it as well, was a piece of activism in itself. Like, and to do any justice to that, to him, to the original actors, and to the play and those people, like, it has to just be as bold, I think.
And it's true, and it's for 2 people that are lovers and spend so much time together, they spend so much of the play apart, and it always felt like they're always just missing each other with everything they're talking about, and they have this void between them. So even when the police officer comes in and says, "Oh, I found a line on the floor," they would have been, but it's for us to infer that just everything gets thrown in there, so like all the pictures and everything, and then we just bury it and move on in history, and then it happens again. So it's just sort of, it's too much. It's a lot. There's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. We'll have a drink after.
Anyone else? I'll go back to you then. Another question.
I can't remember the questions now.
You can't remember.
No, the second question was in regards to your selection for the actors and actresses. Is there something, I mean, obviously it was a fantastic performance, and were there things that was there something about them particularly that stood out to you when you selected them and thought, okay, you will fit this? Or was it the way they were working as a team, or what about them, obviously young or day, but specifically, was there anything that shown to you about those 3 that made
Do
you
you mind
say?
if I just repeat the question, just because we're on camera? So I just want to repeat it loudly. So it was just generally the choice of actors and the choice of actors and why you chose the specific actors. Sorry.
I think I don't know. There was. I'll speak across for all 3 of them. There was something where was just instantly believable. I mean like in the audition, and auditions are sort of fun things to talk about because obviously lots of people audition, but there was something when they all first read that I just instantly thought that they could be those people, and I think there was like so with Scarlett who plays Rita, there was something that instantly encapsulated the kind of loneliness very quickly, and I suppose for me it's just about believability and actually thinking that they could be those people. There's also something I think about energy and charisma that I pick up with very quickly, and I think, but really, I don't know. Sometimes you don't know what you're looking for, but then when you see it, you know what it is. Do you know what I mean? But I knew what I was looking for, so that's totally cryptic. They're just, but yeah, they're just. I think it was their presence and just they were very generous and you know, and I knew it was going to work. And more importantly, actually, I knew they'd work well together, even though I auditioned them separately. Yeah, and they're brilliant actors. I couldn't ask for anything more of them.
Thank you.
Hi, so I have a question. How did you find the, I don't know, to give all your secrets away, but the rehearsal period and having to rehearse and deal with really difficult subjects and quite, I would say, apartheid, but actually how did you deal with that in the room rehearsing?
And that question was, how do you deal with heavy subjects and the heavy subjects across the rehearsal process?
I think you have to really take care in the room with it, but also you can't hide from it. And you have to be honest because the piece is about apartheid and the piece is about privilege and it's about class and wealth. So any kind of trying to run away from it, you can't. But I have to be honest, the actors have to be honest, the team have to be honest, but ultimately we all have to be on the same page. And at the end of the day, the piece is about apartheid. None of us are South African, so none of us understand that firsthand, and I'm not going to pretend any of us do because we don't. But what we have got is empathy, and never ever forget in the time and the place where the piece takes place. And yes, we can do quick maths and compare to lots that are going on now. This continuous through history that's been happening, and South Africa always seems like an extreme example of that, and it is. Human rights abuses are still going on now. But it was us, we had to be honest, and we all had to be honest with ourselves, and sometimes the conversations are uncomfortable, sometimes they're exposing, but ultimately we have to be honest because it's about the piece, and we have to take care of the piece. Like, we have to serve the text comes first, before any of us, which means we all have to be honest with it, and that's it. And never hiding from the uncomfortable conversations. You can't with a piece like this, so yeah, and I suppose like me facilitating those in an environment where everyone feels open and comfortable, to be able to have those conversations without fear of judgment or anything, because that's not useful.
So you touched on the spaces between them and how it felt like they were constantly chasing them. I kind of wanted to know, was this something that you that was like sort of on the page, or was this like a conscious decision? Because it was something that watching it, I found kind of frustrating. Because I was like, you're so in love, but you never actually hold each other, other than the beginning. Do you know what I mean? So was that like a sort of okay, cool.
Yeah.
Like, why that specifically? And what was your intention? Were you trying to? What were you trying to say with that?
I think it sort of goes back to not dissimilar to the design idea about actually you can be incredibly close to someone and 1,000 miles apart at the same time. And it felt like at the beginning, just after the moment, so they just had sex in the back room over there, in the library somewhere, but for the context. But it felt like in those moments they could be happy, but the differences and the gulf between them comes immediately present. For example, when she's talking about shampooing her hair at the beginning, and then he's got no water, and then I've sold the house at the time, black and coloured, and I'm using that in context of the play. Wasn't allowed to own property, so then he's sitting there with these coins. So these kind of differences between them, although they feel close in a romantic sense, actually the distance between them couldn't be further. And it gives, I think, the actors something useful to take when they're constantly trying to get to each other and they're constantly missing each other, and it really helps. It helped me drive the play, I thought. So it was a conscious choice to keep them apart.
It's in the text as well. It's like they start unraveling what the differences are between them, and that starts to divide them slowly over the course of the play. And those more sort of like material, like class, the colour of their skin, everything starts to slowly push them apart.
There's nothing, yeah, exactly, like in the text, but there's nothing to physically keep them.
No.
That physically was a choice, but yes, but like you say, it's very slowly that it starts to unravel. And I suppose it's one of those things where you have to then join it up afterwards. Like, oh yeah, she was talking about water, and then and then for example, when he says we haven't got any water, and she says, oh, this is supposed to be Saturday, and she says, oh, we'll have prayers on Wednesday. It's just like the lack of urgency. The things like, oh, we'll have prayers for the water, and it's like, well, we haven't got any water now. weren't praying and thinking about it. So it's just things like that, but you know, ultimately it's about privilege as well, largely. So yeah, there's always a gulf between them.
Just to say, we've got to let these good people go home, because they're good. But just well done on such an amazing production and such a cohesive team that have just, it's just been such a joy having you here and such a beautiful time having you guys here as well. Thank you for staying for us.